I'm David Flint. The program is Save the Nation on ADH TV, and it's also available on demand. And my guest today is a very well-known person in New South Wales and Australia generally. It's my guest is the Honourable David Elliott, who's best known probably in the New South Wales Parliament, probably the best known of the ministers in the New South Wales Parliament, and also probably the best communicator among the politicians in New South Wales with the people of the state. David has had a career in politics, in the army, where he rose to the rank of captain, and in business organisations, and has great experience. I remember once introducing you, David, to the Crown Prince of Ethiopia, to drop a name, and he was very impressed, but the fact that you were also the Minister for Counter-Terrorism, which really was a very important thing to be. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me, David.
Not at all. Now, you as the former campaign director, the national campaign director of Australians for Constitutional Monarchy, would no doubt have felt, along with, I think, most Australians, a sense of enormous sadness at the passing of Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, I did, David. I mean, unlike a lot of us, particularly those of us on the wrong side of 50, I mean, we've spent our entire life admiring the service of this wonderful monarch. And as I said to a number of our parliamentary leaders after her passing, I said, listen, you have to manage your commentary very, very carefully, because at the moment, everybody in Australia feels like their grandmother has died. And I think that was probably a fair reflection of community sentiment. Obviously, you know, like a lot of us, I shed a tear. It was the end of an era. But I also thought that the dignity we saw from the King, Charles, was one that gave us reassurance that our system of government was the best system of government, because there was a seamless transition. And of course, our institutions didn't crumble because there had been a change of monarch. And certainly there was no bloodshed or turmoil.
And also the remarkable thing in the United Kingdom recently has been, notwithstanding the political problems within the ruling Conservative Party, the transition was also seamless, was it not?
Absolutely. It was seamless in the United Kingdom. It was seamless here in Australia when Anthony Albanese replaced Scott Morrison as the Prime Minister. It's seamless whenever there's a state election and a change of government, as it is with the other constitutional monarchies under the Westminster system. So I think if you ever wanted to have proof positive that constitutional monarchy works well, works at a time when there's a lot of emotion, when there's of course, a change of either a head of government or a head of state. That's what we've seen over the course of the last couple of months.
Yes, I think we should contrast that to the situation in the United States, our great ally, where the president is in obvious cognitive decline, but it would be very difficult to remove him, and if one did, there would be a lot of people who would be unhappy with the successor, the vice president. It doesn't really suggest that the Americans have a system which allows such a seamless transaction when you need some sort of seamless change.
Yeah, that's right. And like, if that situation happened in Australia, if there was the need for us to replace the head of government, the Prime Minister, well, then there's we don't need to go back to an election, but there's still a democratic process, and that is the respective party rooms, and indeed the Parliament, have the authority to appoint the new Prime Minister until the people get the opportunity to vote for a new Prime Minister at the following general election. But whether it be the United States, whose system isn't bad. I mean, I think that they have a reasonably good system, and we stole a lot of things from the Washington system when we wrote our Constitution 120 odd years ago. But you only also have to look at countries like China, where there was a complete reshuffle recently in the economic turmoil, and I think the subsequent political turmoil that I'm expecting, will see that the partisan nature of head of government, head of state, I should say, can really become a burden to the day-to-day running of government.
Well, you're right. And in fact, although we borrowed a lot from the United States, we drew the line at one point, and there was a proposal in 1891 to so frame the position of Governor-General in the Constitution that the Governor-Generalship could evolve into an elected office of great power. In other words, a presidential-style office. But that was strongly opposed. It didn't get out of committee. It was strongly opposed because there was a feeling that the collective executives which we have in the Westminster system is better than a single person executive, as you found in the United States.
Well, that's right, and I think that what we have is the perfect system. It's the right balance between the consistency and stability and the respect for institutions that the monarchy offers. But I don't think anybody in this country feels like that they don't have a say in our democratic process just because we have a Governor-General appointed by His Majesty, on the advice of his government.
Yes. If we can get back to republics and referendums, you consented to become the National Campaign Director at a time when all of the media were saying that a republic is inevitable, and being a Republican was very popular, and being a constitutional monarchist was frowned upon, and it was thought generally in elite circles that the republic would come before the end of the century. Why did you take the position?
Well, it's something that I believe passionately about. I mean, I came from a working class family in Western Sydney where we believed in our institutions. We believed that those institutions made our nation greater, provided the stability that other countries would have dreamed of having. And like a lot of people, I thought that the Queen had served the Commonwealth well. She certainly didn't do anything that justified a change of a head of state. And I also, to tell you the truth, David, I also became quite turned off by the elitism that was being displayed by the Republican movement. I mean, they claimed that they were a grassroots forum or a grassroots institution, but it was anything but. And the way that they spoke down to people who had a differing opinion made me think that the Republican movement might have had a hidden agenda, and they were browbeating us. And that's not the way I think the average Australian wanted to be treated or spoken to.
You were a very important person in that campaign. Who else do you remember being key people in the achievement of the victory?
You and Tony Abbott and Nick Minchin and John Howard all provided, as well as Alexander Downer, all provided great political advice. There were a couple of Labor MPs and stalwarts that provided some advice, and that was wonderful. I think the speech by former late Senator Neville Bonner was telling. And provided enough food for thought for for certainly people that wanted to mix this in with Indigenous issues to challenge those views. People like Alan Jones and Piers Ackerman and of course the wonderful former Dame Leonie Kramer. I mean, these were stalwarts. I remember one great night. I don't know if you remember it, David, where I had Sir Jim Killen, Michael Hodgman, and Reg Withers giving a speech at Parliament House, and there's a very special night. I've got a wonderful photo of it. But the great minds of democracy in this country, and having them all come together and just highlight, this doesn't seem to be right. It doesn't pass the pub test. They're speaking down at us, which means they think they're trying to browbeat us, and that wasn't going to wash.
And the other person was Kerry Jones. But,
Kerry was my boss.
Yes.
Yeah, and she provided a great link between particularly our ability to raise money. She'd written a number of books about the Constitutional Monarchy and the need for us to continue with our traditions. Kerry provided that suburban mum type appeal to the campaign, and which was very, very important, because when we're talking about the elites that came after the monarchy on that time, to have just everyday Australians, people that could empathise with the voters in suburbia and country towns in outback, that was very important.
This group of people that you've mentioned, these are probably the few people alive today who can say that they were part and parcel, the leaders of a group of people who were victorious in a referendum. There's nobody else in Australia alive today who have that record of being victorious in a referendum, and it looks as though we might perhaps be facing a second Republic referendum. That is threatened, is it not, by the Albanese government in their second or third term, apparently.
Well, it is, but I think to give Anthony Albanese some credit, I think his demeanour and his response to the late Queen's passing was dignified, and I think he understood that the demographic that he needs to appeal to was hurting, and I give him respect for that, but. I don't believe Labor will go to a referendum in its second term for two reasons. We are facing a significant amount of challenges as a nation at the moment, whether they be national security with the rise of China or the behaviour of China in the region, or of course national security with the challenges that Russia are putting on NATO and the Western world. But also we've got challenges with rising interest rates, skills crisis, labour shortage, inflation. These are challenges that that any government, let alone a Labor government, wanting to claim that it's representing the interests of the working classes and the lower middle classes. I think these need to be the focus. So if the people of suburbia who returned Labor MPs see Anthony Albanese or Matt Thistlethwaite or any of the Labor MPs or Labor premiers advocating for a republic when families are going through difficult times, cost of living, I reckon that I think that they'll fast find themselves back on the opposition benches, and I think that's probably why. And they're not stupid. They know. The Labor Party knows that the majority of seats that they hold voted no. So do they really want to challenge the contemporary wisdom of their constituents?
Well, that was a very important factor. How important do you think is success or failure in the voice referendum to them going ahead to the Republic referendum?
I think they're completely different things. I really think they're completely different things. I monitor what Indigenous Australians are saying about the voice referendum. It's quite clear that there's no unity. Having said that, I will do anything to give Indigenous people a stronger voice and encourage reconciliation. But it's quite clear that there's no consistency or unity when it comes to the call for the voice campaign. But you'll also find that I think you'll also find that people can differentiate between the two. That's my reading of it. But I also believe that the average Australian is probably looking at that campaign for a voice, the campaign for Aboriginal reconciliation in our parliamentary institutions, as being is not guaranteeing that we're going to get the services that Indigenous Australians need to make sure that we close the gap.
Well, Senator Jacinta Price has made it very clear that she thinks that this is not going to solve the problems, where the real problems are, in the remote communities.
And I agree with her. I mean, when it comes to Indigenous issues, I will always defer to people like Jacinta Price. I'll always defer to people like Warren Mundine. I'll always defer to people that have the lived experience and who challenge the block mentality. And the block mentality is trying to make Australians feel like that there's an easy fix, and the easy fix is the voice, the easy fix is X or Y or Z. But Jacinta and Warren, in my mind, are very, very good at drilling down and highlighting the real problem. So I can tell you, as a parliamentarian and even as a suburban dad, I would probably be, before I made any decision or cast any vote on these matters, I would definitely want to be listening to what Senator Price said first.
Well, I would agree with that, and I also agree with your summation of the future events, the pressures that are going to be facing this country, which make it seem, I would think, to the average voter that a lot of these things, particularly a republic referendum, is a luxury. Can I take you back to one of the key occasions in the early part of your time as National Campaign Director, when you, I and Kerry Jones went to the New South Wales Parliamentary building, and we were there. We were to appear before the Joint Committee on the Referendum Bill, and Erica Betts was there, Senator Erica Betts was there, and he was, we thought, the only person who was going to be sympathetic to us. The strange thing was that when Kerry came in, he dressed her down for not supporting the McGarvey model, which was a rather strange reaction.
Yeah, well, there's a few strange things there. I mean, I suppose then Senator Abetz probably just wanted to make sure that we had made our decision in a well-researched way, and I don't begrudge him for that. He was a great advocate against the Republic. But yeah, you're quite right. I mean, there was an interesting inquiry. If it's the same one that I recall, that was when Malcolm Turnbull said that he didn't want the word president or republic in the referendum question because he knew that would be unpalatable to a lot of people. And I remember Kerry looking at me looking at her. She knew exactly what had just happened, and she said to me, "Go." And I ran down to issue a press release saying even the Republicans don't like the word republic, and the wannabe president didn't want to be known as somebody who advocated for a president. It was, I think that was actually a turning point. And if you look at read Kerry's book, she identifies it as a turning point. It belittled the Republican movement by highlighting the fact that this was style over substance.
Well, it was one of the funniest moments, I thought, in the campaign, when you had the leader of the Republicans going in and saying, well, there are two words I don't want in this question, and one word was the word republic, but the other word was the word president. He didn't want either of them. And I can remember there were days of ridicule by even the Republican press. It went on for several days until he finally withdrew his proposal. You might remember...
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, our proposal was that the question, in just describing how the president was to be appointed, was inadequate. Our argument was that it should also disclose that the president could be sacked by the prime minister without notice, without grounds, and without any right of appeal, which would have been unique among presidents and would have turned the president into the puppet of the prime minister. And that, of course, was rejected. But it seemed to me to be the really serious weakness of their model. Yeah,
well, those working conditions are similar to a cabinet minister, David. So I know the feeling. But at least a cabinet minister, when they get removed from office by a premier or a prime minister, they can sit in the parliament and still have right of appeal, right of reply. Until the next election, when their voters get to decide whether they continue. But when we're talking about cabinet ministers, we're talking about our head of state, and to have a gun to your head, to be a head of state and have a gun to your head like that, in my mind, was very, very dangerous.
The Australian Republican movement has worked very hard over 3 decades. They've produced 3 models. and all of them seem to be a disaster. Why can't they work out a model which somehow at least is as good as what we've got?
Well, I think that goes down to the fact that we've got the best system and they're trying to usurp it. They're trying to find a system of government that's going to be better, because the majority of Australians will vote no to a republic because their view is very strongly, the Australian characteristic towards politics and anything else for that matter is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So first of all, they've got to say that the system that we've got at the moment is broke. It isn't. So therefore, they have to say, well, here's a better model, and they are clutching at straws to find a better model. I mean, there's a reason why New Zealand hasn't become a republic. There's a reason why Canada hasn't become a republic. There's a reason why England and the United Kingdom and Australia haven't become a republic, is because we have been 4 of the 5 continuously democratic states in the world, in contemporary world history.
Contrasted with the Australian Republican movement, which was rolling in money, ACM had to run the campaign on the smell of an oily rag. And I'm wondering, how did you do that?
Well, actually, I vaguely recall us outspending the Republican movement. If I remember correctly, the wash-up, the post-campaign wash-up was that we actually outspent them. But that was not from millionaires giving thumping donations. That was because the rank and file, the average Australians were giving us $2 a week, $5 a month, and the money was coming in through massive numbers of people who were giving small donations. Now, yeah, it was a lot of work, but it just goes to show that Australians who like to think that they're politically aloof, when they can smell a rat, they'll actually be active, and they certainly were on that occasion.
Your job was to go around the country, was it not, to get the foot soldiers, to get people who would be prepared in each electorate to be the person who would deal with that electorate, the director or the head of that electorate, so that we had somebody in every electorate who could bring together the foot soldiers, the people who were volunteering, to turn up to the polling stations and to campaign for the no vote.
That's right, and we did that. I spent months and months and months travelling around the country and appointing state campaign directors who would be responsible to the federal electorates. And the business model that we had was we had a campaign manager in every federal electorate, and their job was to be the spokesman for the media and the community in that area. And of course, to make sure on polling day we had plenty of people handing out how to vote cards, and the model worked well. The irony is, when I look back, was that even though everybody thought that because John Howard was the leading monarchist in the country, this was a Liberal campaign, the fact of the matter is I could name you dozens and dozens and dozens of federal seats where the local campaign manager was actually either a member of the Labor Party or voted Labor. And if you have a look at the result on election night, on the 6th of November 1999, we in southwestern Sydney, in the suburb of Claymore, we got 2 votes to 1 on the Republican movement. So in the most working class Labor part of Sydney, we actually beat the Republican cause by 2 votes to 1.
Sometimes we use a map of Australia, and we say, well, we're showing the seats that voted against the Republic are shown in blue, and the seats which voted for a Republic are shown in red. And if you have a normal size page, an A4 page, and you show that map, all you can see is blue. You can't see the seats that voted for a Republic because they were all in the inner city. They were all small-sized seats in the inner city, which emphasised that this was really an inner city, elite Republic.
It was, because they had the luxury of being able to pontificate on matters like this that were completely unnecessary. And I remember, I think it was Kim Beazley in the lead up to the referendum campaign went to a construction site and tried to advocate for a republic to to the workers on that construction site, and they told him to bugger off. They said to him, we're more interested in our wages, we're more interested in making sure our kids get to school, we're more interested in the cost of living and bringing interest rates down. We're not interested in this thing called the Republic.
In that parallel system that we set up, we had, like me, a convener. We had a convener in each state, but we also had, as you rightly pointed out, a director, somebody who understood politics and did the actual running of the campaign in that state. And I remember there was a brilliant person in Victoria, Rick Brown, and I think that that he was recommended, was he not, by Nick Minchin?
Yeah, I think it was Nick or Tony Abbott recommended Rick.
Probably a joint
and he had the toughest job.
Choice.
Yeah, he had a tough job, Rick Brown, because everybody thought that Victoria would be the first state to vote yes for a republic. But I see that occasionally, erroneously, media reports that Victoria was the only the state that voted yes. It actually didn't. It voted no. And I was thrilled at the outcome down there.
Yes, I remember writing to, I think it was the Britannica, pointing out that they were wrong, that Victoria did not vote. Yes, it was also
Correct.
one of the states which voted no, which means that from the state's point of view, the states were unanimous. People then come back to me and say, well, the ACT voted yes, but the ACT, from the point of view of the Constitution, doesn't count. It's not a state. It's not relevant in that regard.
West Queanbeyan.
Also, the Victorian campaign was run differently, was it not, in terms of electorates?
Originally, it was going to be run by state electorates, but in the end, their campaign standard operating procedures were consistent with the rest of the nation. So originally, Rick, I think, was going to run it by state electorates, but the federal electorates ended up being the campaign jurisdictions, for want of a better word.
In those days, of course, we only voted on one day. Do you see any problem in the future when you have this extended period of voting, which I assume will apply also to referendums? Will that make it more difficult for the next national campaign director if you're not that person?
Well, I think it can. I think that's possible because public sentiment being as fickle as it is, people change their opinions from day to day. So you might find that on the third of the month you have an opinion on how to vote or what to support, and then the 10th of the month something else happens which changes your opinion, and so your vote changes. So I'm certainly not opposed to pre-polling and postal votes. I think that's an important way to make sure that we give everybody the opportunity to vote. But we do have to accept the fact that if that's going to occur, we probably need to consider the blackout period to ensure that people's votes aren't influenced from one day to the next in the event that they're not all voting on the same day.
I've been told by people who know that in America the important thing is getting the people out to vote, because voting is voluntary, whereas the problem here is manning the booths, because everybody's going to come there, and if they don't see people there presenting a case, they're less likely to vote for that if they haven't completely made up their minds.
Yeah, and I see that in contemporary politics a lot. I mean, people will complain if there's an absence of a political party at a polling booth. And I think that highlights the reason why we need to continue to have a point of contact campaigning, particularly on polling day. But, we have up to a third of the vote now polling before election day. So I know for me, I've always made sure that pre-poll was a priority for me when it came to time management in the lead up to the election.
One of our problems during the campaign, and I'm not sure whether it will be if there's a second referendum, I suspect it probably will be, it was that most of the media, almost all of the mainstream media, were against us, and they were not only against us in their editorials, they were also against us sometimes in the way that they presented the news. For example, I remember one newspaper which on their referendum page showed the Republican side, the Republican news, with a slouch hat, and they showed us with a crown as though we weren't really Australian, and the slouch hat suggested that the other were very Australian. But I remember I was in Dubbo. I was invited to a debate before the Country Women's Association National Conference, which was an enormous affair, really. I've never seen such a large crowd in a country town hall. And I was debating against a former national minister, a woman from New South Wales, who decided that she was no longer a minister and therefore could campaign for a republic. But I happened to say during the debate, when we were talking about head of state, and I was explaining head of state, and I said, well, I just happened to observe that Hitler was a head of state, but Stalin never was. Stalin never took on the position of head of state in the Soviet Union. There was then a report in the Dubbo Liberal which said that I likened the Republican situation to falling under Hitler and Stalin, a form of Nazism and communism, which was, I said nothing like that, but that actually appeared in a newspaper, and I found that the newspapers and the media actually did sometimes campaign very hard in a very, very determined way against us, and that was obviously a problem. It didn't stop us, but do you think that will be the same if there were a second referendum?
I think people will be a lot more cautious in the media this time, because I think they thought it was a fait accompli in '99, just like they thought it was a fait accompli with Scott Morrison's election in 2019. I had similar concerns. There was one newspaper who used to head their referendum coverage by the title of Queen or Country, as if you couldn't be both. You're either deciding whether you're in favour of the Queen or the country, and I made a complaint about that title. But yeah, it was very emotive. It was very emotive, and because I think, particularly at the end of the campaign, and I'll probably say that that's the last 3 months, when it was becoming more and more apparent that the case hadn't been made, even though there was the conventional wisdom was this would come down to the last week because people haven't really focused on it yet. I think as the Republicans got spooked that there was no momentum, that's when they try to use their friends in the media to advocate harder and harder and harder. But it was quite clear that the electorate wasn't having a bar of it. And ironically, that year, 1999, I was writing my master's thesis on political communication, and I had a great time drawing on some very, very personal, if not brutal, experiences.
The Republicans made a number of tactical errors, and one was, even at the convention, they decided to hold a simultaneous function for the change of the flag, and there was a dinner or a cocktail reception to come and see the new flags. And none of the Constitutional Monarchists, of course, went to that, but it seemed to be very foolish to also mount a campaign for a new flag, and with a person from the New Flag Association being in the Australian Republican movement.
Yeah, that was a big tactical error. It was a big tactical error. They made a couple of them. We've already touched on the fact that they highlighted that they didn't like the word republic or president in the question. I think linking it to a change in the Australian flag, which even people like Mike Carlton have subsequently rejected. He said that, no, we can't change the flag. And, of course, linking it to allowing their supporters, particularly in the Greens, but other political movements as well, allowing their supporters to try to link it with things like, land rights and other political causes, which may or may not have been the same that the Republicans had, or the Constitutional Monarchists whose votes they needed to court had the same view on. So that created the feeling that this was this wasn't just the only issue on the table at the moment, and it created a lot of suspicion in the electorate. They wanted to know, okay, if it's the Republic, that's fine, but why are you talking about all these other things? And why are we talking about things like United Nations conventions and the Australian national flag and states' rights and that allowed I think that made their campaign just a little bit more confusing.
I thought that John Howard, and assisted by Nick Minchin, ran a very fair campaign. In fact, I don't think there's been a fairer referendum process, because they made sure that the people of Australia understood what was happening. They had a convention which was very open. They didn't control the convention in any way. John Howard didn't abuse his rights of appointment. In fact, we found that most of those appointed were actually, a large number of those appointed in his own gift tended to turn out to be Republicans. It was very, very fairly run. And when they decided to appoint the Vote No and the Vote Yes committees, they decided to do that on the basis of the number of votes you got at the Constitutional Convention. So we were awarded 8 seats on the Vote No committee. 8 seats went to ACM because ACM was the dominant monarchist group at the convention. There were 4 or 5 others. And the real Republicans who were opposed to the model, they got 2 seats. And I remember John Singleton saying to me after the results came out of the referendum, he said, I really thought that would destroy you. I really thought that you'd be fighting hand and tooth against the real Republicans and the whole thing would explode and you'd never get any advertising out. And it seemed to work very smoothly. And was that your impression too?
Yeah, it just highlighted the fact that there was something suspicious about this model. And I think that's another reason why if it comes up again in my lifetime, and I actually don't think it will, but if it comes up again in my lifetime, I mean, the first debate is going to be on the model. Will it be a democratically elected president, which means that will that president be able to usurp the government, or will it be appointed by the Prime Minister or the Parliament, which means that the president is essentially impotent? And I think for those that want to change our system of government, that's going to be the focus question. And I don't think they'll ever agree, which means that I don't think there'll be another referendum on the Republic.
I think our system gives 2 wonderful things. Through the Crown, it provides leadership above politics, but in addition, there is a reserve constitutional guardian there. There are the ultimate reserve powers available to the Governor-General or to a governor, depending upon the Constitution, as they are to the King or Queen. And I think that's a wonderful situation which I can't see anyone replicating in a Republican model.
Well, I have to agree with that, David. I mean, I think the majority of Australians who think about these matters are saying to themselves, we're quite comfortable with the system of government that we have. We look around the world and seeing such inconsistency when it comes to the application of law and such a diversity when it comes to systems of government that the one that's used by some of the safest countries in the world, i.e. Canada, New Zealand, Australia, United Kingdom, is the one we'll stick with.
David, before you go, I hope that if a referendum comes up, you will agree to be the National Campaign Director of ACM on that occasion. But in the meantime, as you leave the State Parliament, as I read in the newspapers, what are you going to do? Are you going to go into business or back into politics? Are you at this stage able to tell us where you're going?
No decision's been made, David. I mean, I've got a couple more conversations to have with the Premier. My instincts are to have a little bit of time off because it's been pretty brutal for the last couple of years. I mean, I've been in Cabinet for 8 years. and that's a long time to be a cabinet minister. It's nearly 3 times the length of Gough Whitlam's prime ministership, and I think that I deserve. My family deserves a little bit of time at home. I'll try to do as much campaigning for Dominic Perrottet as I possibly can. And then, I've only known 3 careers, David. My 20s I was a soldier, my 30s I was in industry associations, my 40s I spent in politics. So now that I've just nudged the wrong side of 50, I might reflect on all those 3 and see if there's a chance for a second bite for any of them, or otherwise I'll have a sniff around and see what other opportunities are around.
David, you obviously have all of the skills and experience to make a contribution into any of those. I want to thank you again for the enormous contribution you made to our victory in 1999, and I do wish you well in whatever engagements you get involved in over the next few years. Thank you, David.
Thanks, David. It was the sweetest victory of all.
It was. Thank you.